In the cat treat aisle, every pouch looks healthy and harmless. But once you flip it over and read the ingredients, many are loaded with grains, salt, synthetic dyes, and preservatives linked to cancer in lab animals. I investigated 8 popular cat treat brands sold across the U.S. and found that most are cutting corners while charging you for empty calories. Vague meat fillers, artificial colors, and chemical preservatives were surprisingly common. I found 2 brands that actually sell clean, honest treats with real meat or fish and nothing else hiding inside the bag. Number 8. Friskies Party Mix. Friskies has sat on grocery store shelves for decades, and Party Mix is one of the most recognizable cat treats in the country. At around $3 a pound, it's one of the cheapest treats on this list, and that price comes with a long ingredient label. The bag lists natural and artificial flavors together, which means the company isn't being fully transparent about what's actually making the treat taste like chicken or cheese. Behind that vague wording sits a mix of grain fillers, ground corn, wheat, and other cheap carbohydrates that cats don't actually need in their diet. There's also added color in the mix, synthetic dyes dropped in purely so the treats look more appealing sitting in the bowl. Not because cats can even tell the difference. Cats are obligate carnivores, meaning their bodies are built to process meat, not corn and food dye. On top of the grains and dyes, Party Mix also carries a noticeable amount of salt and several preservatives to keep the shelf life long. Many cat owners online say their cats go crazy for the smell and crunch, but once you look past the smell, there's very little actual nutrition sitting inside each piece. The shape itself, tiny, crunchy stars and shells, is designed entirely around visual appeal for the person buying the bag, not around any functional benefit for the cat eating it. And because the price point is so low, Party Mix often ends up being the treat people grab without a second thought, tossed into the cart alongside the regular cat food during a quick grocery run. Number 7. Purina Whisker Lickens. At roughly $3.50 a pound, Whisker Lickens sits just above Friskies in price, but the ingredient list tells a familiar story. The bag contains all sorts of grains stacked on top of each other, multiple types of starch used purely as cheap bulking agents. Artificial flavors appear again here, the same vague wording that hides what's actually being used to make the treat smell appetizing to a cat's nose. Added dyes show up in the mix, too, giving the little treats their bright, candy-like colors, despite cats having almost no ability to perceive color the way humans do. There's a noticeable salt content as well, something that sounds harmless in small treats, but adds up fast for cats who get multiple treats a day. And then there are the preservatives, the kind of synthetic shelf stabilizers that worry toxicologists more than they worry the average shopper standing in the treat aisle. One of the most common preservatives showing up across budget cat treats is BHA, butylated hydroxyanisole, which the National Toxicology Program has listed as reasonably anticipated to be a human carcinogen based on animal studies, and which the International Agency for Research on Cancer classifies as possibly carcinogenic to humans. To be fair, regulators note that the tumors seen in those animal studies appeared in the forestomach, a stomach compartment cats and humans don't actually have, so the direct risk to your cat isn't fully settled science. Still, when there are treats on the market that skip the preservative entirely, it's hard to justify a brand that keeps using it. Number 6. Whiskas Temptations. At around $4 a pound, Temptations is one of the best-selling cat treats in America. The little crunchy pouches sitting at the checkout line in nearly every pet store. But peel back the marketing and the formula looks a lot like everything else on this list so far. The ingredient panel leans on vague natural flavors, wording broad enough to cover almost any chemical or extract the manufacturer wants to use. Grains show up again here too, used as cheap filler to bulk out the treat without adding real meat content. There's a noticeable salt level packed into each tiny piece, and synthetic vitamin supplements added in to make up for the lack of real nutritional density from actual meat or fish. This shows up across nearly every flavor variety, so switching flavors doesn't actually get you a cleaner ingredient list. Multiple cat owners online have pointed out that their cats seem almost addicted to the smell and texture, which makes sense once you consider how heavily flavored and salted these treats really are. Number 5. Feline Greenies Dental Treats. At close to $10 a pound, Greenies markets itself as a health product, something you give your cat for fresher breath and cleaner teeth, not just a snack. But despite that premium price and dental health branding, the ingredient list tells a very different story. The treats are built on a base of grains and starches, the same cheap filler ingredients found in budget snacks, costing a third of the price. Synthetic vitamins are blended in to compensate for the lack of real nutrient density, the kind of supplement powder that sounds healthy on a label but does little to replace whole food nutrition. There's also a surprisingly high salt content packed into each tiny treat, something most owners would never guess just by looking at the bag. The texture itself, a hard, kibble-like crunch, is what's actually responsible for any dental benefit. The abrasive shape scraping at plaque as your cat chews, not some magic ingredient hidden inside. So you're paying nearly triple the price of a basic treat for a benefit that comes mostly from shape and texture, while still feeding your cat the same low-grade fillers found further down this list. Number 4. Temptations Classic. The original Temptations formula sits around $5 a pound, making it more expensive than its Whiskas branded sibling. But the ingredient concerns run even deeper here. The label lists vague animal fat and animal digest, two ingredients so broadly defined that the source could be almost anything: beef, chicken, fish byproducts, or some combination the company never has to specify. On top of that vague meat sourcing, the bag is colored using artificial dyes, specifically yellow 5, red 40, and blue 1, three synthetic colorants you'll recognize from candy and soda. Red 40 has been linked in animal studies to hypersensitivity reactions, and the FDA itself announced a voluntary phase-out plan for several petroleum-based synthetic dyes, including red 40, yellow 5, and blue 1, citing ongoing health concerns. Yellow 5 in particular has drawn scrutiny from allergy and immunology researchers going back decades, due to the severity of reactions some sensitive individuals experience. None of these dyes add any nutritional value to the treat. They exist purely so the little pieces look more vibrant sitting in your hand or in the bowl. A cat's eyes are built very differently from human eyes, with far fewer cone cells, meaning the bright reds and yellows on the packaging are really there to catch the attention of the person standing in the aisle, not the animal eating the product. For a treat that's marketed as a beloved classic, the actual formula leans heavily on vague fillers and colorants instead of any real identifiable protein source. Number 3. 9 Lives Treats. At around $3.50 a pound, 9 Lives treats are priced like a budget option, and the formula behind them confirms exactly that. These treats are built on the same low-grade meat byproduct fillers used throughout the rest of the 9 Lives food lineup, the kind of generic protein source that gives manufacturers maximum flexibility and minimum transparency. Meat byproducts can technically include organs and other animal parts, which isn't inherently dangerous, but the lack of specificity makes it impossible to know exactly what your cat is eating from bag to bag. The actual protein content ends up thin once you account for all the grain and filler used to bulk out each treat. Cat owners who've compared 9 Lives treats side by side with pricier options often describe the texture as drier and the smell as far less appealing to picky cats. Because the formula is built around cost-cutting rather than nutrition, you end up with a treat that's cheap for a reason. not because the company found some clever way to keep quality high while lowering price. Before I reveal the two brands that actually pass, if you've made it this far, drop a comment telling me your cat's favorite treat brand, good or bad. I want to know. Number 2 on the avoid list, and arguably one of the most surprising names here, is the broader concern around synthetic dyes across nearly every mainstream cat treat brand on store shelves. Across the brands covered so far, Yellow 5, Red 40, and Blue 1 keep reappearing again and again in different bags under different branding. These dyes serve zero nutritional purpose for your cat, who can't even perceive color variation the way you do standing in the aisle. Regulatory bodies have continued to scrutinize these colorants for years, and the recent voluntary phase-out announcement from the FDA signals that even regulators are no longer fully comfortable with how widespread these dyes have become in the food and pet food supply. If a brand is still leaning on synthetic dye after dye purely for shelf appeal, it's a strong signal that the rest of the formula probably isn't built around quality either. Number 1 on the avoid list, the preservative BHA itself, found scattered throughout nearly every mainstream brand mentioned so far. BHA has been used since the 1940s to keep fats and oils inside pet treats from going rancid, extending shelf life by months or even years. The National Toxicology Program has listed BHA as reasonably anticipated to be a human carcinogen since 1991, and the International Agency for Research on Cancer classified it as possibly carcinogenic to humans back in 1986. Both classifications built on animal studies showing tumor development at high doses. To be clear, the FDA still considers BHA generally recognized as safe at the concentrations currently permitted, and the tumors observed in those animal studies occurred in the forestomac, an organ cats and humans don't have. So toxicologists are genuinely split on how directly that risk translates to your cat curled up on the couch. But the FDA has also placed BHA on its list of additives currently under safety reassessment, which tells you the science isn't considered fully settled even by the regulators responsible for keeping it on shelves. When there are brands selling treats with zero preservatives at all, that uncertainty becomes a much easier thing to simply avoid. Number 2, the brands that actually pass. PureBites freeze-dried chicken. At around $25 a pound, PureBites sits at a completely different price point than everything else on this list. And the ingredient label explains exactly why. There's only one ingredient listed on the bag: U.S.-sourced chicken breast. Nothing else added. No grains, no dyes, no preservatives, no vague fillers hiding behind broad terminology. The chicken is freeze-dried rather than cooked with heat, a process that locks in the natural protein structure and aroma without needing any chemical preservation to keep it shelf-stable. Cats tend to respond instantly to the smell, since freeze-drying concentrates the natural scent of real meat far more than a processed, flavor-added treat ever could. The texture is light and slightly crumbly, easy to break into smaller pieces for training or for cats who prefer smaller bites. Because there's no salt, no sugar, and no synthetic additive of any kind, you can feed these daily without worrying about the cumulative effect of preservatives or dye buildup over time. Many owners who switch over from a budget brand say their cat's coat and energy noticeably improve within a few weeks, though that's anecdotal rather than something backed by a controlled study. Even picky cats who normally turn their nose up at new treats tend to respond well here, since the smell of pure, freeze-dried chicken is far stronger and more authentic than anything sprayed on top of a grain-based filler. The only real downside is the price, since pure, single-ingredient meat costs significantly more to produce than a bag full of grain filler and flavor powder. Number 1. Honest Kitchen Wishes, the grain-free variety. At close to $30 a pound, this is the most expensive treat on the entire list, But once you see the ingredient panel, it's clear where that money actually goes. The treats are made from 100% human-grade haddock, wild-caught in Iceland. A single ingredient with nothing artificial added anywhere in the process. Human-grade is a specific regulated term in the pet food industry, meaning every ingredient and every facility involved meets the same standards required for food made for people, not just the lower bar set for typical pet food production. Wild-caught haddock also means the fish wasn't raised in crowded farming conditions, giving you a cleaner, more traceable source than most fish-based treats on the market. The smell is noticeably more like real seafood than anything else on this list, intense in a way that immediately gets a cat's attention from across the room. Texture-wise, the treat stays light and flaky, closer to real flaked fish than the dense, chewy bite you get from cheaper meat-based treats. Because it's grain-free and built from a single named fish species, there's no mystery ingredient, no vague animal byproduct, and no synthetic dye anywhere in the bag. For cat owners who've grown tired of guessing what's actually hiding inside a bag of bright, candy-colored treats, this is about as close as you can get to feeding your cat a piece of real, simple seafood. Some owners do note that the strong fish smell lingers on hands and counters longer than a typical treat. A small trade-off for a bag with nothing artificial inside it. Because the ingredient list is just one named fish, and nothing else, there's also no risk of the kind of vague animal byproduct sourcing that makes brands further up this list so hard to trust. So out of 8 major cat treat brands, only 2 actually back up their price with a clean, honest ingredient list. The rest lean on vague fillers, synthetic dyes, and preservatives that regulators themselves are still reassessing. Let me know in the comments which of these 8 brands you've actually fed your own cat, and whether you'll be making any changes after seeing what's really inside the bag. And if this saved you a wasted purchase next time you're standing in the pet aisle, that's exactly why I make these videos.